question we have. A lot of people would say that with all the suffering in the world, that this in some way would prove that a loving God does not exist. So what would be a good response if that question is brought up to us?
I think the main thing to do is to turn the tables and ask that person what his argument is to show that the suffering in the world is incompatible with the existence of an all-powerful and loving God. The fact is that most people have never thought about this question very deeply as an intellectual problem. They are simply responding emotionally to the admittedly horrifying evils in the world and just saying, how could a loving and all-powerful God permit that? But in fact, as a philosophical problem that is much discussed in the literature, it is extraordinarily difficult to prove that the suffering in the world is either impossible or highly improbable given the existence of an all-loving and all-powerful God. That assertion or claim puts a burden of proof on the atheist's shoulders that is so heavy that no one has ever been able to bear it. The fact is that God could have morally sufficient reasons for permitting the evil and suffering in the world, and there is absolutely no reason to think that if he does, that these should be obvious and evident to us. God controls the course of human history. He sees the end from its beginning. And events that occur that in our limited framework appear to be pointless and needless suffering can fit into his providential plan in ways that we would never have foreseen or anticipated. And therefore, we're just not in a good position to make these sorts of judgments that any given instance of evil that we observe is either impossible or highly improbable given God's existence. Now, that's just a short, soundbite-ish answer. Much more could be said, and I've written about this, for example, in my book, Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview, and in a little book called Hard Questions, Real Answers, that I would commend to our listeners. Now, let me just say one other thing. I mentioned that I think the problem of suffering and evil is really an emotional problem. And my intellectual answer does nothing to solve that emotional problem, does it? My answer is apt to appear arid and uncaring to someone who's really suffering, even if it is a good philosophical answer. I think the answer to the emotional problem of evil is found in the person and death of Christ. On the cross, we see how God himself took on our infirmities and sins and bore an incomprehensible suffering. Even though he was innocent, he suffered for us an incomprehensible suffering, the punishment of the sins of the whole world. None of us can understand that. And yet he was entirely innocent. If anyone could complain of innocent suffering, it would be Jesus of Nazareth. And why did he do this? Because he loves us so much. So when we understand his love for us and the extent of what he was willing to suffer to bring us into a saving relationship with God, I think that can help us to find the emotional strength to bear the cross that we're asked to bear during this lifetime until we go to be with God and every tear will be wiped away and we will enjoy a life of eternal and unending happiness with him.